Hello, everyone, and welcome for this special episode for our podcast series from Beach Research Radio for the Brain and Heart Interconnectome ideas. My name is Deyanira, and I'm going to be your host for today's episode. We're really excited today for having here Dr. Luis, who is going to be sharing with us his experience and insights. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thank you so much for having me here.
So I would like to start with the first question, which is, could you please introduce yourself and your field of research?
Sure. So I'm Stephen Lewis, and I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Guelph. And my research focuses on really trying to understand self-injury and related mental health adversities that people experience. And I approach my work in many ways from a person-centered perspective. And what that means is I'm trying to understand people's lived experiences and to give voice to those lived experiences and their concerns by way of situating the individual as an expert in their own lived experience. And in so doing, it's trying to tackle a lot of significant, often systemic issues that we see in our field, such as stigmatization, which we know can get in the way of people feeling as though they can seek out supports, that they can find perhaps different kinds of help or support that they may benefit from in different ways. And we also do work in terms of trying to really champion a strengths-based approach. And that is trying to recognize that, which all people do, but to recognize that people have inherent strengths. But too often, a lot of our field has in many ways adopted a more deficit-based perspective, basically asking in many ways what's wrong with a person as opposed to recognizing, what is happening in their lives that's keeping them here. What are the resilience factors that are relevant to their lived experience? So we're trying to challenge some of those common discourses and trying to bring to light people's strengths in order to foster resilience, to foster well-being, and to really give people a voice and to really engage in priority-driven work. Basically as a means to ensure that the research that we conduct, the questions that we ask, and how we ask them in many ways, is in line with what people want us to know. That we're identifying things and understanding things and putting things into context in ways that matter. And that's important given the stigma that we know is out there, because it fosters a more compassionate understanding of the concerns that people have. It can be very empowering for those individuals as well, by way of having a voice which historically, unfortunately, people feel very much marginalized and silenced in their experience. And as a consequence, they feel very alone in that. And we're trying to combat that in different ways.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Actually, I think it's really important to recognize that we all came from different backgrounds and we all have different stories that, in a way, that we have overcome different challenges, right?
Absolutely.
And we are resilient in our own ways.
Yeah.
So that's really important to recognize as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I would like to continue with our second question, which is, what does ideas mean to you on a professional and personal level?
Right. So I think if I reflect on sort of the personal and the professional, it's hard to sort of disentangle the two for me. I'm someone who lives with a mental health disability. I'm someone who has lived experience in the very topics that I focus my research upon. So I've experienced stigma. I've experienced difficulties obtaining support through the mental health systems that we have. And so in some ways, I can relate to some of the experience that people share with us in the work that we do. So to that end, really sort of, I think in many ways at the forefront of the work that our team does is we're trying to foster a more inclusive practice, an inclusive practice in terms of the research that we conduct. And that really starts with the questions that we ask, related to that, how we ask them. So we really try and learn from people's lived experience to platform their concerns, their voices, using their language in ways that is really getting at the core of what matters most to those individuals. And so in that regard, we're trying to have more inclusive-based research. So we involve people who have lived experience in all aspects of the research process, from the very beginning to then carrying out the research, to understanding what are some of the ethical concerns that are relevant to them. How do we even frame questions? How do we even frame aspects of things like what go into a consent form? How do we frame and position any kind of resources we want to give to people to make sure that they're meeting the needs that people actually have? So we try and in many ways foster this sort of inclusive practice and greater inclusion of people with lived experience, not just as participants in research, but also as researchers. And that's a big part of what we do in terms of trying to foster inclusion. Part of that too is ensuring that we have diversity of voice and diversity of experience embedded in the work that we do. And that's important because we recognize from this person-centered perspective that no two people have the exact same experience. Even if they have similar adversities, similar challenges, and other elements of their lived experience, which does have similarity, we can't assume that we can paint sort of a picture with one brush and then paint the same, using the same kind of brush to paint the same picture with a different person, because we're going to miss things that are maybe relevant to that person's lived experience. So we also try and in many ways challenge some of the ways that people might conceive of, well, who does research? And by way of inviting people and involving people who have lived experience in, again, the research process. So they can play a role in all aspects of research. And in essence, what we're trying to do then is have more equitable research being done that includes underrepresented populations and communities that have been, in many ways, historically left out of the conversation, and unfortunately so. So we're also then in many ways trying to make sure that when we do our work that we are engaging in practices that resonate with people. So it has to be accessible in nature. And collectively, all of this in many ways, I think, is a way to engage in more socially judicious research. And it's not even just limited to research in the work that we do. It's also engaging in advocacy and involving people in different roles within our profession. And I think that's also a really important element of social justice, to ensure that we have greater representation, we have greater diversity of voice, greater perspectives, people's needs being met that have not been met historically. So we have a lot of work that we do in all these different fronts. We do a lot of work in terms of trying to champion that within our field through calls to action, outreach initiatives, and so forth.
You mentioned something really important, and talking about a diverse space, I think that not only helps to bring new ideas, but that also helps to formulate new questions. So I think
Absolutely.
that's really important and powerful.
Yeah. And so thank you for raising that, because that's actually a really critical piece that I think gets overlooked. So we do a lot of research where we're asking questions and addressing questions that, if you look back in our field, have never been asked. And if you ask people who have lived experience, some of those questions seem somewhat obvious. They're fundamental questions, but they've been overlooked because of the way that research has been historically conducted.
Yeah, and I think we have normalized to always look for solutions, but not that much for looking for questions, because
Yeah.
questions make us uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really important part.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I would like to move forward with our final question, which is, in today's world, what message would you like to leave our audience with?
Sure. It's a really big question. I think I would say a few things. One is, I think it's important to recognize and to champion the role of people who have lived experience in all aspects of the process of research, from the very get-go to what we do methodologically, to the approach to data analysis, interpretation, and then to how we then disseminate that research. I also envision in many ways us having more opportunities for people with lived experience to take on leadership roles and to be researchers in our field. I think that is incredibly needed, and it's been a long time coming, I think. So we're starting to see some change now, and I think that I'm hopeful and optimistic that we're going to see more of that given some of the initiatives that we're seeing taking place in our field. I think part of it too is in doing research and trying to understand people's lived experience and the mental health adversities that they have experienced. I think it's important to situate that within a context and to see the whole person. And that's really sort of fundamental to the underlying values that we have in our work. It's person-centered. It's seeing the person as the expert and what they have experienced. And it's trying as best we can. And I think we have to approach this too with some humility of trying to understand what that experience has been like, what context that's been occurring in, and an effort to really try and also not just understand their experience, but also challenge these more deficit-based orientations which have been sort of in many ways dominating our field, which merely emphasize a question around sort of, what's wrong with you? And in the work that we do, it's asking questions like, well, what brings you here? And in some cases, it's what's keeping you here? And those kinds of questions, I think, that sort of underlie this different approach, this more strengths-based approach, this resilience-focused approach that we're trying to see. Because we do see that, yes, people might have tremendous adversities they've experienced, challenges they've gone through, but they're still here. And that signals to me that they have tremendous inner resolve, inner fortitude, and resilience. And I think that's something to really bear in mind. And I think by way of doing the research that we're doing, and really centering the individual as an expert in their own lived experience, that we're really sort of allowing ourselves to foster a sense of hope and resilience for those individuals, but also for the individuals who may have misconceptions about mental health adversity, about self-injury, and a lot of things that we focus upon, to really offer an opportunity for a more compassionate understanding.
Thank you so much. Actually, I think no one knows better the needs than the people who experience this. And I think that's why it's so important for them to be part of the whole research process. And actually, now, as an example, we recently had a meeting with patients,
Mhm.
and it was really valuable for us as researchers because when you have a project, you're in the lab, you know why you are working for it, but having the patients involved, for example, in this case, that's so powerful. You learn to see that project through their eyes.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah. I mean, it's nothing about us or for us without us.
exactly. I think it's a process where we all need to work together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So, first, I would like to thank you for being here, for taking the time for having this interview, and also to thank you for sharing with all your experiences, your insights, your perspectives. It has been really valuable for us, for personally for me, and for our audience as well. So, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
I would like to also thank our Beats Research Radio audience for tuning in. Don't forget to like and to subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram channels at Beats Research. And on behalf of our entire team and our director, Dr. Emilio Alarcon, we hope to see you all in the next episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you.